In my opinion, in the past, there have been plenty of reasons to take a look at the NBA draft lottery and wonder if it's on the up and up. There are flat out things that make it look like it's rigged, and at least, if nothing else, stupid. This can go all the way back to the very first draft lottery of 1985, where the prize was Patrick Ewing out of Georgetown, and it just so happens that the New York Knicks get the number 1 overall pick. I mean, there have been other times you could point to over the years. I look at the Bulls in 2008, and they only had, what was it, like the 8th or 9th worst record in the league, but they end up getting the number 1 overall pick, so they can take the hometown kid and Derrick Rose. Another one I always point to is 93, the year after the Orlando Magic got Shaq. All of a sudden, they're at the very bottom of the lottery, but they end up getting the number 1 overall pick so they can draft Chris Webber, who they can then trade for Penny Hardaway and a boatload of future first-round picks. I'm just saying, after LeBron leaves, the Cavs win the number 1 pick the next year, so they get Kyrie Irving. There are things you can point to over the years, and it makes you wonder just how on the up and up the draft lottery's been. But if you wanted to make the argument that the draft lottery is legit and sometimes the odds just work in a different way and it's just dumb luck, this is a year you can point to and make a very, very strong case. I promise you. Because if you were trying to rig a draft lottery, you most certainly would not have the Phoenix Suns get the number 1 overall pick. You most certainly wouldn't have your 2 big winners, the teams that move from out of the top 3 into the top 3, being, for God's sakes, the Sacramento Kings and the Atlanta Hawks. That just wouldn't happen, especially with big notable market teams like the Chicago Bulls and the New York Knicks in the lottery, potentially the Cavs even looking at life after LeBron possibly. The situation with the Lakers pick, depending on where it ended up, where it could potentially either end up with the 76ers or it could end up with the Boston Celtics. You have the Clippers in a position that's, granted, the Clippers, but they are still a team in the Los Angeles market, the second biggest media market in the country. If you were going to rig a draft, this would be the Special Olympics version of rigging, because in no way, shape, or form would you intentionally set out to rig it this way. But the lottery has happened, and as promised, I did one before the draft lottery. Now that we know the order of the first 14 picks in this year's draft, I'm bringing you my post-lottery mock draft. And yes, it is still only 14 picks. Next week's mock draft, we'll have all 30 in round 1, okay? But for now, we can talk about the lottery. And we're going to start off with the number 1 pick. It's going to come down to 2 choices for the Phoenix Suns. Is it going to be DeAndre Ayton, who just played his college ball for a year at Arizona? Or is it going to be Luka Doncic, the guy we've been waiting for a year to come over to the league from Slovenia, who's been wrecking things over in Europe and is presumed to be the next great international star? And for the Phoenix Suns, I feel like you can make a strong argument for both guys. DeAndre Ayton has special offensive skills at 7'1". He's an explosive athlete. The Phoenix Suns really need a big man. They've got to be incredibly familiar with him. He's somebody that fan base will be very familiar with from his time even in 1 year in college at Arizona. So it makes sense. But then on the flip side, Luka Doncic to me is more a representation of what the modern NBA is and will continue to be. The fact is, championship teams in the league now, for the most part, are not built around big-time dominant centers. They just aren't. You can point to a team like the Philadelphia 76ers and say, they got their asses whooped in 5 games by the Boston Celtics, whose best big man, Al Horford, is primarily a perimeter player now. I mean, the Sixers probably win a championship at some point in time down the road, but fact of the matter is they're the exception to the rule. They're absolutely the exception to the rule. The other most notable teams, their stars are the point guards and the wing players. And the big men are the role players. So do you want to invest the number 1 overall pick in hoping DeAndre Ayton becomes a star? But even if he is a star, it might be a more dated approach and philosophy, more aligned with the 80s and the 90s than with the NBA of today, where Luka Doncic, who can handle the ball, who's a great facilitator, has some point guard ability, even with so-so athleticism, but with size, shooting ability, he fits more the mold of the modern NBA, especially when you're talking about a Phoenix team that just hired his old Slovenian national team coach to be their head coach. There's a lot of things that indicate that Doncic would potentially be a better fit for the Phoenix Suns at number 1 overall. It's interesting to me, though, that Doncic is putting out there that he hasn't fully committed to playing for the NBA in the NBA this upcoming season, and he's not a guarantee to come over. To me, that screams of, please, Phoenix Suns, take me. Good God, I do not want to end up in Sacramento, and frankly, who could blame him? The Kings are about as bad as it gets when it comes to an NBA organization, that's for damn sure. So right now in this mock, the Phoenix Suns, I've got Luka Doncic. That could change. I could go back and forth on that. They may very well go with an older school mentality and approach and go with DeAndre Ayton. I'm just not 100% sold that that is the right approach here. As far as the Kings in this case, Doncic is off the board, so it is a no-brainer for them. It has to be DeAndre Ayton. And I will say for the Kings, after getting De'Aaron Fox in last year's draft, now you bring in DeAndre Ayton, I do really like that pick for them more than I do the Suns. Because even when you look at the Suns, their history in recent years of absolutely obsessing over and over-investing in the point guard position, it just feels like Luka Doncic fits more of what the Suns love and what they want to be, especially with their obsession with point guards. He seems to fit better than Ayton. But when you look at Sacramento, they've already got their point guard of the future in De'Aaron Fox. You could sit there and say, well, then why wouldn't you take a wing? Well, based off of the draft board and what's available, do you reach quite a bit for a wing player? Or do you take the best player that's still on the board? And for the Kings, it would be really hard to knock them at that point in time with Doncic off the board for taking DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton has the potential to be a star. He has the potential to be a LaMarcus Aldridge type of offensive presence on the floor. It'd be really hard for Sacramento to pass on that. For the Atlanta Hawks, I'm assuming the pick probably comes down to Marvin Bagley and Jaren Jackson Jr. For now, I'll put Marvin Bagley there, but they could end up liking Jaren Jackson more. I've got Memphis taking Jaren Jackson. It seems like he's a pretty safe bet as a top 5 pick, but you just never know. Mo Bamba, I know he just recently measured his wingspan at the combine, and it was a record 7 feet 10 inches. You're talking about a guy that's just under 7'1", who's demonstrated a little bit of three-point range. You know, he's a guy that fits more of the mold of a modern NBA center. A guy that can be a disruptor in the paint defensively, a guy that can block shots, he can take up space, but offensively is a guy that can stretch the floor. The concern with him is just how athletic is he really? Would he be able to switch on pick and rolls? That's a fair question, but if you're the Dallas Mavericks, it's worth finding out with the 5th overall pick. I know I've seen some people in the pre-lottery mock where I had Collin Sexton, I think, going 5 or 6, and people thought that was crazy. I've got him going 6 here to Orlando, and even if you don't agree with it, and even if you think it's crazy, it's still the Orlando Magic, so would you really put it past him to take Collin Sexton? Which would leave my Bulls with Michael Porter Jr. And it would be one of those picks, especially if you're projecting Porter to play the 3 at the NBA level. It's either one of those picks where the Bulls, it feels like, got a real massive steal due to circumstance and situation, or one of these types of picks where he's a Michael Beasley type of guy and he's going to be a massive disappointment for you. I personally have my concerns about Michael Porter with the back injury and such. Those things have a tendency to linger and come back time after time after time. And you see a young guy like that, do you really want to worry about him having a back problem so early in his career? But for the Bulls, the upside is massive, and the risk probably would be worth it. As far as the Cavs, you know, Trae Young could make sense either way. If LeBron stays, you get another capable scorer in the backcourt and somebody that can stretch the floor and hit from the outside. If LeBron leaves, then you get a young, high-volume shooter, a guy that can put the ball in the hoop and gives the Cavs at least a little bit of franchise life post-LeBron. When I look at this mock, not a ton of changes, frankly, in terms of the top 14 players. I believe pretty much the same 14 players were there. And I do anticipate that changing in the next couple of weeks, don't get me wrong. So I'm not so set on it to say I feel like I'm right or I have a great grasp on where I would rank these players, because the truth is I don't right now. But this is what I see as of this point. But again, a lot is scheduled to change. So let me know what you think. If you're the Phoenix Suns and you're picking number 1 overall, do you take DeAndre Ayton or do you take Luka Doncic? Also, if you're Luka Doncic and the Sacramento Kings look potentially poised to strike and take you, do you go to Sacramento even if you don't want to be there, so that way you can start the clock on your rookie deal, so that way in 4 years you can look forward to that second contract, which would be the max deal? Or do you want to stay away from Sacramento so bad that you will sign some type of lucrative couple million euros a year contract to stay over in Europe? Is the answer that easy or is it not? And let me know what you think in general of my mock draft, and if one of your teams is picking in the lottery, who do you want them to take? I'll be back, like I said, next week with another mock draft, so stay tuned for that.